Welcome to Through Ancient Eyes. I'm Gail Heaton. If you're new here, I want to tell you that what I do each week is I share insights about the ancient Near East culture of Torah to uncover how much better our God is than any other power that we might ever want to put our hope and our trust in. I will give you like a little bite size piece of ancient Near East culture that I've taken from the week's Torah portion. And I do this so you can get like you could understand better what the ancients were up against. Because when you can understand their worldview and their mindset, you're going to be able to get a greater sense of how God met them right where they needed him to. And when you can see what he's done for the ancients, you might just trust him that much more in your own life. Okay. So we're in the Torah portion, Yitro, which means in English, that's Jethro. A while back, it occurred to me that most of the religions, like the world religions, they started out with a like one single person's so-called personal revelation from God that was given just to them, right? What's interesting in this Torah portion this week is that this seems to specifically point out that that's not the case with our God, right? Because at Sinai, there were witnesses, right? So we had this collective population that was unified in purpose, maybe not quite yet mature, but collectively they experienced God, right? Exodus 20:18. Together they saw the lightning, they heard the trumpet, they saw the mountain in smoke, right? So what we're being told about here, this was a historical experience for the entire group, not just for Moses. I mean, yes, it's true that the people were overcome with like the grandeur of it all, and not much later, we read that they actually asked Moses to kind of stand in as an intermediary for them. But that initial revelation from God, that was collectively all inclusive, right? It was this verbal and this visual love bid from the creator to each one of them individually. And it's incredible when you think about it. God spoke, this unseen one, right? He showed himself visibly and audibly visibly in the fire and the clouds, and audibly in the trumpet blasts. And if that's not amazing enough, he invited these people gathered here into covenant with him. And that's something that no other God had ever offered. So they were freed from Pharaoh's heavy yoke in order that they could receive the light yoke of God's kingdom. And Yeshua speaks about this. He speaks about his father's kingdom as laid out in Sinai in Matthew 11:28 through 30. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Now, a yoke, seen here in this picture, that binds two oxen together so that they can work a task that's assigned to them in tandem, right? Now, for the yoke to work as designed, each animal that's strapped to it has to work at the same pace, the same level of strength and output. So this means that one can't kind of pull ahead of the other. And if one kind of lags behind because of injury, maybe, well, the other one needs to slow its pace or it ends up dragging that one along. But on the other hand, one can't just like refuse to move, it has to keep up because the two are working as one unit. And Yeshua uses this common agricultural image for his audience to explain how his disciples can yoke up with him in exchange for that yoke that we had before, the one that we couldn't keep pace with, the one that was too much for us to bear. So Yeshua gives us permission to reject the world's yoke because the world slows its pace for no one, right? The world drags its unwilling partner wherever it wants to go. But not so with God's kingdom yoke. It fits us perfectly. Like as if it was designed exactly for us, or maybe we were designed for it, right? And so it has this sense of um, comfort. But make no mistake, it's still a yoke, and we need to keep pace with Him. So this leads me to another extraordinary thing that happened at Sinai. Okay, so as I mentioned, God spoke, and everyone at the foot of Sinai, they heard His voice asking them to enter into a covenant, brit in Hebrew. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, um, he has uh, he has this book called Judaism's Life-Changing Ideas, weekly reading of the Jewish Bible, and that's where I'm getting this from. He does this job of contrasting social contracts with social covenant. Okay, so the world offers us social contracts, but God offers us covenants. So what are social contracts? They involve two or more people coming together in like a, a self-interest. What's in it for me? To make a mutually advantageous exchange. Okay. So this is how business transactions are done. I'll do for you only if I'm getting something out of it. But Rabbi Sachs says that social covenants, on the other hand, are different. They involve two or more people, but each respects the dignity of the other person and respects the integrity of the other person. And they come together in a bond of loyalty and trust to do together what neither of them can do alone. So think about that. Do together what neither of them can do alone. Consider this: what God cannot do alone is live within the human heart because we have free will. He gave us free will. So for us to be in a relationship with God, that requires us to freely choose Him, right? And this choice is what God offered at Sinai to those who were present and then to all who came later. So he's offering us bonds of belonging, and that's no small thing. He reveals himself through the revelation of his Torah so that we can enjoy a relationship together with him. So covenant, that brings two parties together in a relationship of mutual good to the other, right? And the two parties, they don't have to be the same, exactly the same, in order to have a relationship. And absolutely that's what we see with our unseen holy one, right? The maker of heaven and earth. He's infinite, he's eternal, but he's in a relationship with us, human, finite, mortal, fallible. It's extraordinary. And not only does God offer us belonging, but he offers us a blueprint for a just and a righteous society that has a particular mission to carry out, right? Which is bearing his name. And we don't have to guess what this mission looks like either. It's true. He does give us terms and obligations in the covenant. Like we have serious responsibilities, as does he. But it's equally true that working with God to accomplish these responsibilities, it's the working with him that empowers us to be that appropriate image bearer for him. He wants to do this with him. He wants us with him. That's incredible. It would have been incredible for the ancients to hear this, and it's incredible for us to hear this. And God's mission has always been that we live as his ambassadors of righteousness and justice, right? Among the nations, among those in our spheres of influence, among the ones who don't yet know that they need him and that we carry and we lift up his name, right? His name, that's his character, his essence, his purpose. We lift that up to those around us. Now, we do fail often. Yes, that is true. But we have the ultimate image bearer in Yeshua, right? And as we follow Yeshua, the closer we are following him, the more we can kind of like draft off of his success, right? And we're gently pulled along. And he waits for us to catch up, but we have a responsibility not to lag on purpose, right? So there's that picture of that gentle yoke again. Now, in modern times, I think we've lost some of the positivity of receiving God's Torah, I think. Maybe it's because we've lost sight of just how extraordinary it would have been for a God in the worldview and the culture of the ancient Near East to present a covenant like Torah to the people. So I think that, if you want to get a sense of the excitement at the giving of the Torah at Sinai, pour over Psalm 119 because that really celebrates the beauty of God's words from Sinai, right? In Psalm 119, you're going to find some key words like joyful, rejoiced, freedom, delight, treasure, joy. These are all words that are celebrating the giving of the Torah. So, what did the ancients know that we don't? Well, for that, I think we need to go back to the ancient Near East and learn a little bit more about just how fickle and secretive the gods were. Because, you know, no matter where you might currently sort of fall out on the belief about whether or not there were other gods that the people were worshiping, either instead of or sometimes alongside the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the ancients very much believed this. And when you look at Ephesians 6:12, you see Paul's his theology of principalities and powers. That's actually derived from this worldview that the gods were very real. So Ephesians 6:12 says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." Now, rulers, authorities, powers, spiritual forces, those are all geographical dominion terms, specifying that the gods that controlled those places um, were like those were the ones that Paul was ministering in. And Paul wanted to explain that through Messiah's resurrection, Messiah has the power to free the people from bondage from those very real powers. Now, I think it's worth noting that God played into this belief system, right? When he systematically targeted and picked off the gods in the plague account and beyond, right? Showing these gods, these powers, these authorities to be nothing compared to him. So, nothing. What does that mean? Nothing in substance or nothing in power? So, according to the worldview of the ancients who authored the scriptures, it meant nothing in power like our God. Exodus 15:11 says, "Who among the gods is like you, Lord? Who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in glory, working wonder?" Now, that's a pretty weak statement if it's said against things that don't actually exist. You ever thought about that? To put it in modern terms, and I heard John Walton, he didn't use this particular example, he used a different example, putting it in modern terms. It's saying God is better than Marvel Comics Spider-Man, right? So if these powers weren't um, real, then it would be like saying God is better than Marvel's Spider-Man, and that makes a mockery of God's true sovereignty because, sorry folks, Spider-Man isn't real. Okay? So a God is false, not because it isn't real in substance, but because the gods really are not the ones that are calling the shots. And that's the message that the ancients needed to hear. And that's the message that God was saying. Now, this isn't to say that people could understand what the gods wanted from them, though. Okay, and that's a key point I want you to catch here. The gods didn't speak audibly. Even the priests, they were the ones who were carefully trained to discern the will of the gods. They had to do it through signs that the gods supposedly left them in the natural world. Okay, and the ancients were desperate to hear any kind of clue about what the gods were thinking and about what they were expecting to do next because they were fickle. They would change their mind all the time. So the priests were determined to know the rules. They wanted to know what pleased or displeased the gods. But that was a tricky, tricky business. So let's talk about ancient divination. Now, this was considered a science, and there's some archaeological findings of thousands of cuneiform tablets from uh, Babylon and Assyria that deal with divination. And they show that not only was the goal of divination foretelling the future, but it was also a way to seek divine manifestation in the universe. So the priests, they would read the stars, they would read meteorological phenomenon, they would read land formations, oil poured on water, incense smoke, flowing water, and bird flight. But the most common method was reading internal organs of animals, specifically a lamb's liver. Interesting. So, to the ancients, the internal abdominal organs, especially the heart and the liver, that was thought to be the seat of emotions and thoughts and intentions. Okay. Not the brain like we know today. So, therefore, the heart, the liver, those organs, they were believed to best reveal the will of the gods. And this method was considered actually to be the most sophisticated act of divination. So the diviner would start by praying to the gods, asking them to sort of manifest themselves in this ritual. And a question would be asked, a sheep would be slaughtered, and then after this, the god's response would be determined through examining the various markings and grooves on the liver. So the ancients believed that the priests, they could communicate with the gods in all those ways that I mentioned. But it never entered their minds that a caring, intimate relationship was possible or ever on the thought of the minds of the gods. So again, no other ancient record exists of a god giving a treaty to a whole people group, much less through like public divine revelation like our God did. So it's very important to think about this. Our God takes the initiative, and He invites us into um, this caring intimacy with Him, and He spells out in detail, what we can do that pleases him, right? And the other incredible thing is what pleases him are the things that make for a right and a righteous and a just society. And he tells us this not through like divination to just like this select trained professional, but in a way that the entire nation was able to see and hear. So this Torah of God was revolutionary to the ancients because God was using his Torah to help us to attach to him. The scriptures teach us that life is varied and it's unpredictable, right? Of course, we know that from just experiencing it, but but God's Torah, his instructions, they present a like a variety of situations that we might encounter, and it offers us wisdom on how to handle those particular situations that might come up. For example, Deuteronomy 21:10 says, "When you go to war against your enemies, and the Lord your God delivers them into your hands, and you take captives." Okay? Now, in Hebrew, the word when, that's the Hebrew word ki, and in modern Hebrew it means because, but in Torah it's got actually three meanings: in case, rather, and if. Okay? So this wording in Deuteronomy 21, it isn't a command and it isn't when you go to war, but it's if you go to war, then this is how you should act with righteousness. Does that make sense? So Torah gives us examples of how to live justly using a variety of possible scenarios that we might encounter in our fallen cultures. The ancient Near East was a warring culture, and it had little to no regard for its enemies and those that were captured. So God spoke into this culture, and he brought his Torah to modify those evil practices and to make society more humane through his human agents, through his people. So allowing God to, or God allowing humanity to change through this more gradual influence, that is not the same as him condoning the barbaric practices of the ancient Near East. Okay? So God's desire was and is for us to work with him to improve the world. And the idea is that we don't do it with a checklist, but we do it with God, asking him to enlighten our steps in a given situation based on the culture that we're in now. And that's what it means to be attached to him. David's Psalms, I think that they speak really clearly to this idea about belonging or attachment to God that God desires with us. Devakut is attachment in Hebrew. Psalm 27:7, David has this heartfelt plea. He says, "Lord, hear me when I call, have mercy and answer me." And I think that can kind of put words to our groanings for someone to see us, to hear us, and to respond with compassion, right? And I think that's at the core of what all of us really need. That we can have this kind of bond with our creator, that seems almost too good to be true. And I think that's part of our problem, humanity's problem, in accepting this gift. We think that we're not worthy. We forget that he created us, so that makes us worthy, right? Because we're his. And so when we forget that, we secretly ask God, are you there? Do you really want me? Do you really understand me better than I understand myself? Are you really for me? Can I count on you for everything, or are there some things that I have to kind of save myself from on my own, right? And we learn in Torah, and we learn through our experiences, if we let him, that his answers is this resounding yes, I am enough for you. Romans 8:37-39 says, "No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, angels nor demons, the present nor the future, nor any powers, neither height nor depth, nor anything else in creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in our Lord Yeshua Messiah." To mentally agree that God is enough, that's one thing, right? To act it out and live it day to day like you mean it, that's quite another. It's only when we're attached to God that we can put down those sterile checklists, do this, don't do this. Torah was meant to be the living and adaptable wisdom literature, right? It's adaptable to our current lives. It's our wisdom. It's not a checklist of do this and do that. Shema Israel, right? Hear Israel. Shema. That has a meaning that's far more intimate than just obey, because it invites an ongoing conversation between us and God. And it assures us that he still speaks to us if we allow him in. And allowing God a place in our life this way, this intimate way, that wasn't easy for the Israelites. And it's not easy for us. Beliefs, they need to be tested. They need to be tempered in the heat of the wilderness experience, right? That wilderness, the in-between space consisting of where we've been and where we're going, not there, not here, kind of in between. And it turns out that we need this sort of in-between wilderness space to help us work out life with God. And what's cool is the remaining chapters in Exodus, that covers the important lessons that we need to learn about life in those dry places of the wilderness. So as we continue in the book of Exodus, may we remember and be as adamant as Moses was. Exodus 33:15. God, if your presence does not go with us, then do not send us up from here. I'll see you next week in the next Torah portion. Until then, be blessed.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.